Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, everyone. My name's Elijah. Today, I'm going to be accompanied on the screen for those of you on YouTube by Tyler's wonderful face. He's smiling. He's in a nice field somewhere. He's wearing a backpack with a little plaid shirt on. He looks great. I'm just going to be screen sharing from another computer. That's the entire reason for this. You'll also see me looking over at that computer because, frankly, it's a bigger monitor. Um, but it doesn't have a camera. So I'm going to use that for all of my information, and I'm going to talk to you guys here. Um, we're figuring it all out. I'm going to get a nice little webcam to stick right on top of that thing, and then I won't have to do this. But um, anyway, today the Orioles have signed a new bullpen arm. You can see his Baseball Savant page on the screen if you are looking on YouTube. That is Andrew Kittredge. We know him from his Tampa Bay days. We were glad to see him leave the division and glad to see him come our way. So we'll talk about him a little bit. And then, we've talked about the O's rotation a lot recently on this podcast with the Charlie Morton signing, even going back to Tomoyuki Sugano's signing. Uh, I just wanted to step back and talk about the roster as a whole. We'll surf roster resource together a tiny bit, and we will do all of that after thanking the sponsor of our show, of course. Bet Online continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for online betting in 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, Bet Online is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball to NHL and UFC. Bet Online is the number one sports betting source for the new year. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, Bet Online has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. Bet Online, the game starts here. So, Andrew Kittredge. This guy's pretty cool. Uh, it's a 1 year, $10 million deal. Um, there is a club option for a second year, and it's technically $9 million this year with a buyout. If I remember right, the club option is also $9 million next year. Um, yeah, like I said, he had a number of years with Tampa. He had some closer experience there, not a ton. I guess I can pull up uh, his career stats right here real quick for those of you viewing with me. Um, yeah, he has been pretty dominant in the past. This 2021 season in particular struck out over 27% of guys faced, 5.3 walk percentage. His ERA was below 2. Man, I'm scrolling quickly with my eyes. I'm sorry. Yeah, 188 ERA in that 2021 season. He managed to notch a couple saves there. Really dominant stuff as a whole. Ground ball rate over 55% or over 50% at 53.5. He has had a lot of success. In 2022, he did have Tommy John surgery. However, he came back at the end of 2023, looked fine. There wasn't anything objectionable about it. He was traded to the Cardinals before the end of last season, and he went out and threw 70 and two-thirds innings. He was second in holds in MLB. He struck out 67 guys, almost one per inning. So not the most, elite strikeout rates that you'll see from relievers. You can see actually 53rd percentile here, looking back at the Savant page. Really, kind of middling there and kind of middling on the walk rate as well, slightly above average walk rate. Um, but he's been very effective. Very, very, very simply, he's been very effective. The thing that jumps off the Savant page is this chase rate. It is in the 100th percentile. Almost 40% of pitches he throws outside of the zone, hitters chase at. Um, that just speaks to a layer of deception. That speaks to, I mean, one thing, I'll talk about this slider. He throws this slider hard. It pushes that decision point closer and closer to the hitter. I heard Sarah's talking on the podcast today. Anytime you see sliders over 87 miles an hour, if you can get any kind of action on them, they're going to be effective. That's just the nature of it. These pitches that can dance at high velocities are going to play up, and his certainly does. Because of that, he throws this slider almost 50% of the time. You see here 49%. His sinker accounts for another 38%. So he's really, really a two pitch guy. This four seam, he throws about 12% of the time. It's a very, very interesting four seam. It actually aligns very closely with what we see in Kyle Bradish. It's not as Uh, Not quite as interesting as Corbin Burns' cutter because it's more of a like cutty four seam than a true cutter. It's a nuanced distinction, but um, you know, he has this very, very vertical four seam, only runs, yeah, on average zero point 0.7 inches to his arm side, which is highly, highly unusual. I honestly, if you had to ask me, when I look at this, if you look at his Baseball Savant page, for those of you just listening to the podcast, you can overlay an arm angle um, with the pitch arsenal basically on the pitch movement graph, and a super super rudimentary check basically for how interesting this arsenal is you can almost sometimes look at, I'm zooming in on it. You can look at deviation from that arm angle. The easiest way to get action on a pitch is just very like simple plain Magnus effect, and that's you get the ball back spinning or top spinning, and it will move. And when you do that, it's going to move in plane with your arm movement unless you're really twisting your wrist, which is difficult to do. So pitchers really start to do interesting things when they can deviate from that arm angle, when they can get something moving, almost perpendicular to it, which is really what this four seam does. Um, and that's what's kind of interesting about it to me personally. Uh, I wouldn't be totally surprised to see the Orioles mix that in potentially against left-handed hitters because he does seem to struggle with them. This four seam that does not tail the way that most would, you could potentially start to get that in on the hands, and then you get the slider in under the hands, um, and could develop a bit more of an effective, two pitch combo there against lefties. Interesting to see how the Orioles take it. That said, this gives the Orioles, yeah, two back end options who do not have excellent results against lefties. I guess I kind of buried the lead there. Last year lefties hit 296, 337 with a 571 slugging off of him. Six of the 10 home runs he gave up were against lefties. He was significantly, significantly less effective against them. And I do think that's an important thing to note. It's somewhat interesting that we're bringing him in. He does have this weakness against lefties. Sir Anthony Dominguez also got hit pretty hard by lefties last year. And so this kind of starts to take shape like we are comfortable with guys who are, do have splits. I think Dominguez isn't quite as drastic as this is here, but you can expect Kittredge to be fitting in, mixing and matching with somebody like Gregory Soto, with somebody like Keegan Aiken, seeing what both of them did last year. So, interesting to see how that shakes out. Before I talk too much specifically about the bullpen, I do want to make a note. Um, we did break a deal off. This Kittredge deal came together after Jeff Hoffman had agreed to a 3-year, $40 million deal with us. Um, that deal was broken off because of a failed physical, which, a lot of us like had flashbacks to the mid 2010s. Um, yeah, this absolutely seems to be the Orioles being smart with their money. It seems that he also had a deal broken with the Braves. I think I remember seeing that was a 5-year deal, if I remember right. I don't really have too much commentary on this. This seems like the smart move, given that another team decided the same thing. Um, but I think the thing we can take away from it, it was agreed to, again, a 3-year, $40 million deal. It is good to know the Orioles are like actively pursuing those kinds of deals. It is not only these 1-year, Charlie Morton's, Tomoyuki Sugano's that we're looking for. We did already know that with Corbin Burns, but Burns could have been the exception rather than the rule. He is obviously a special talent. Going for somebody like a Jeff Hoffman who was, mid upper tier of the market, maybe not the most attractive thing that would make you come out of your comfort zone. Yeah, like we all have this concept of what the comfort zone is for the Orioles. Clearly, he fit within their comfort zone, extending 2, 3 years, couple tens of millions of dollars. That was personally comforting to me. I enjoyed just seeing that we were willing to do that. Um, yeah, I guess the last thing I'll note before I talk too much, I forgot I did not pull up. Um, just Stuff Plus here. I wanted to note, yeah, the slider Stuff Plus, uh, it has never been below 124 in any year of his career. It was 33% better than league average last year. This cutter, I think, is a mischaracterized cutter on Baseball Savant. It's kind of interesting, but they say he threw this cutter 6 times. It is zero point 0.1 miles an hour harder than his slider and has the exact same movement profile. So I am inclined to say that that's also just a cutter or also just a slider. But yeah, but the main thing, like the slider is really effective. The fastballs are about league average. They have been, slightly above in years past. So I'm interested to see if the Orioles can regain some of that. It hasn't really been about lost velocity. It hasn't really been, anything too explicit. So curious to see how the Orioles take that, probably tweak something. Um, anyway, I'm gonna move on. So want to talk in more generalities. The website I'm pulling up for those of you following along on YouTube is Roster Resource. Roster Resource is a thing maintained by Jason Martinez of Fangraphs. It is like the comprehensive, easy way to look at a team's depth chart in real time. It's a really cool thing. So they basically will give you a projected go-to starting lineup versus right-handed pitching, and you can also look versus left-handed pitching if my mouse will cooperate with. Never mind. Um, but you've got a projected bench, projected starting rotation, projected bullpen. He will go and update this as new free agents are signed. You can see Andrew Kittredge is hanging out right here as a setup man in the eighth inning for the Orioles. This will be updated in real time. You can see who's on the injured list for us: Mateo, Bradish, Wells, and you can kind of see how we're shaking out. This is the 26-man roster as it currently stands. I don't think there are any huge surprises here, but I did want to go through and just talk about the state of the Orioles. Obviously, I cannot stress this enough. So many people talk about this offseason as though it has already finished and the Orioles didn't do this, the Orioles didn't do that. There are still months in this offseason before games start happening. It is absolutely true, and I will talk to it later, almost likely that the Orioles can still make a trade. Um, there's no reason to pass full judgment. This is just checking in on the state of the Orioles. So, zooming in on this bullpen a little bit, right? Obviously, Felix Bautista is coming back. If you were to talk about what is the story of the offseason for the Orioles bullpen, it is getting Felix Bautista healthy. We did go ahead and sign this guy, Andrew Kittredge. He's not it. The addition is Felix Bautista. Bautista is obviously incredible and will obviously make immediate impacts, but we got very, very comfortable seeing him come out in the ninth inning and stay out there in the 10th in order to, shut down the opposing team again with the runner on second. I don't think we can count on that this year. Very simply, Felix is going to be brought along gently. He's going to be taken care of. This is something that has been mentioned by Hyde in press conferences. He's not just going to go out there and throw 85 innings out of the out of the ninth inning. That's just not what's going to happen. Um, so we will rely on these other back end arms, and the Orioles have really filled this out nicely. It I went and talked about Dominguez and Cano earlier this year in our like 2024 recaps. I guess I should say earlier last year, now that we're in 2025. But, Dominguez made these few tweaks to really, really elevate how good his four seam fastball was. He also has the power slider. He also throws a sinker. Was chatting with Dan Sanchez on Blue Sky a little bit. That we think there's an opportunity to work in the sinker a little bit more. Dominguez has a proclivity to find the middle of the plate and have some damage done against him. No fastball is good enough to know it's coming and have it down the middle and get a major league hitter out. That's just not a thing that exists. So Dominguez, if he can get out of the middle of the zone, could be wildly effective. Gregory Soto, I think I'm literally trying to recall my prep for an episode I did months ago. But if I remember correctly, he walked something like three guys in the 20 innings that he threw with us. He was very effective, struck guys out, kept balls on the ground. I mean, everything you'd want to see. And he's just a mid-relief arm for us right now. We do see Keegan Aiken here. We know what he did last year. We do see Yennier Cano. We know what he can do. And then, like the kind of afterthought in the bullpen is Ciano Perez, who by no means is ineffective in any way, shape, or form. This is not even a knock on Perez. I personally like feel very, very good about having Perez come out in the fifth or sixth inning. Um, yeah, I like it. Um, the last guy listed in the pen is Albert Suarez. Basically, like we have filled up this rotation. I'm trying to think about if there's anything I want to say about the bullpen before I move on. Um, I guess the biggest thing, yeah, with Felix out, expect something like any of these five guys, Kittredge, Aiken, Dominguez, Cano, Soto, to all get opportunities in the ninth inning. I think we're going to mix and match a little bit. I think it will be a little bit of a closer by committee. I just don't see a reason for the Orioles to push it. And once again, a couple of these guys do have somewhat distinct platoon splits. Dominguez and Kittredge, Aiken and Soto. We'll see how it goes. But early on in the year, I expect Felix you know, to get. I don't expect him to be throwing two consecutive days until at least a month or two into the season. Don't expect him to ever be going more than 25 pitches in an inning. If he walks a couple guys, fine. Pull him out. We'll get somebody else in there. Um, we'll see how they use him, but I think that's going to be the story for the early part of the season. The late part of the season, I think this will be a really fun group to watch. I think we'll be firing on all cylinders. Um, and it's really, really nice to, particularly like with Dominguez and Bautista, once again, have guys in the pen, particularly at the back end, who can strike somebody out. We have talked about this ad nauseum on this podcast, but, Perez, Cano, Aiken actually strikes people out pretty well, but Perez and Cano for years. Soto is, excuse me, Soto is somebody who can strike guys out, but for the 98 miles an hour average fastball that he throws, he doesn't strike out quite as many as you'd think. Just showed you Kittredge is actually maybe the worst strikeout artist in this pen, ignoring Albert Suarez. So it should be a good group. I do feel like very, very secure in the performance of the pen. I think we're going to be in good shape. Um, the thing that concerns me about it ultimately is a lack of flexibility. We know that the Orioles value keeping one spot open, uh, preferably for some guys who are optionable to keep rotating through. If the pen has been overworked for 3 days in a row, there are a couple 4 or 5 inning starts. You ultimately need to be able to bring fresh meat up, and have somebody who can go out and throw 2 innings and give the pen a day off. Unfortunately, I guess you can see right here, Cano has two options. Are you going to option Yennier Cano? I don't know. Aiken has an option. Are you going to option Aiken, who was again one of the best relievers that we had last year? No, I I don't think you are. So Suarez can't be optioned. Perez can't be optioned. Soto, no. Dominguez, no. Kittredge, no. And so I just expect that we're going to find ourselves in a situation where maybe even Ciano Perez gets the boot this year. Um, Not that I would be happy to see it. I love home run hat catches in the bullpen. Um, but that's just kind of the way it shapes up. These teams value flexibility. We talked about it as we were getting rid of Mike Baumann last year. This is what teams do. They like to cycle through and be able to just have a fresh arm, pretty much regardless of how good it is. So we'll see. Albert Suarez locking that down, not being able to be optioned. I'm a little bit confused as to how this all shakes out with this rotation as well. Um, Turning to that rotation, as it shapes up right now, we have Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Charlie Morton, roster resource lists Dean Kramer and then Tomoyuki Sugano. They'll be there in some order. I bet Dean would be first, but uh I'm curious how that shakes out over the course of the year. If Sugano takes well to the MLB, which I think he has a chance to do, potentially he'll be able to kind of earn that fourth spot in our minds, whether they actually move things around or not. But the interesting thing about it, right, is we have these five guys, and what that does is for depth, that leaves Suarez, who is in the pen right now. It leaves Trevor Rogers in AAA. It leaves Cade Povich in AAA, and it leaves, you know, not that these guys are as much of a concern, but it leaves Chase McDermott and Brandon Young in AAA. McDermott spent all of last year at AAA. Young got a relatively early season promotion, if I remember correctly. Didn't spend the entire year there, but did extremely well. Looked really, really good. Um, we're at the point where we would kind of want those guys to get innings. I think that they're almost they're the less problematic of this group, though. Cade Povich has nothing left to learn at AAA. Um, and honestly, like the thought of stashing him there while he will be optionable and he will be able to physically be there, it it's a little bit of a like, man, he just started to put it together at the end of the year. Things were looking good. And then you have Trevor Rogers, who we traded two prospects for last year. We are paying about $3 million this year. And is he also going to sit at AAA? I There's an old adage in baseball that says you can never have enough pitching. And I agree, but I look at this and I say it kind of feels like we have enough pitching. Uh, this is a really, really deep setup for the rotation as it stands. And I don't want to like confuse the word deep with good. Good is overly simplistic, but I think this is a fine rotation. This is, borderline, this is a top 15 rotation, borderline top 10, I think, if everything shakes out right. Bradish comes back eventually. But this is a deep rotation. And what we lack in upside, we really do what we have security. We have known quantities. I think everyone in the rotation but Sugano, I think, has a really pretty high floor. You know, I Dean Kramer, we see Dean Kramer's floor every year. I don't, I'm not trying to knock the guy, but he just is a known quantity. He goes out and he does what he does. And it's a serviceable back end of the rotation arm. And you, that's fine. Charlie Morton is going to go out there and he's going to be, I mean, he's been the exact same pitcher for the last 3 years for the Braves. Grayson Rodriguez, it's like if he stays healthy, you know what he's going to do. And Zach Eflin always stays healthy, and we all know, we know what he's going to do. So it's really it's a solid, safe rotation. It is a safe rotation. That's the word for it. And I think teams like known quantities. Teams like to have projectability. They like to know what they're getting into, essentially. And when I talk about the lineup in a minute, obviously we'll be able to say, like, yes, this team, if we have even a half decent rotation, solid bullpen, the lineup can carry us through the year. But it's really interesting. And I think that the way we are currently set up, we have, as it stands right now, we have two guys in hello, Rogers and Povich, who would be able to be a five starter right now in a major league rotation, pretty much anywhere. Um, and then you have Kyle Bradish, who's eventually going to come back and kick another one out. Not that we should necessarily plan for that now. You can make adjustments at the trade deadline. You can do whatever after you see more about, how his rehab is going and everything. But you have those two guys. You have two guys again in McDermott and Young. I think Young could probably sit at AAA all year, and that would be like not hindering his development. But McDermott largely, you at least want to see what he can do in the pen a little bit. He has this really, I think, pretty like high octane arm, a really like strong arsenal, and can come up and strike some guys out. I think he really could be effective, but as long as Albert Suarez is there in that last position in the pen, you're never going to see McDermott do that. Um, and that's even ignoring somebody like a Colin Selby, who we also really should expect to see. You got to scroll down a bunch. Yeah, I mean, we've got Selby. I guess Brian Baker's there. I'm ignoring him. But yeah, and then this is actually a good point too. Cade Stroud, who we protected in the Rule 5 draft last year, are you going to strand him at AAA all year? I think that's an interesting thing. Um, I expect Ronzi Contreras to be gone by the time this all comes around. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, we'll see how it shakes out. I think that the point I am trying to get to here is I could very much see a situation where the Orioles go ahead and they say, all right, we do have some depth right here. Let's go ahead and try to trade some of the control that we have for upside. And let's include somebody in a package. I think somebody like a Dean Kramer, honestly, would be really, really interesting as a trade chip. Again, he's a known quantity. He's a mature pitcher, and he's got 3 years of control. He's cheap. He's below market rates. It's a win for any team, and it's very much positive value. I think that we'll see how it goes. Obviously you're not going to trade Morton. You're not going to trade Sagano. We literally just signed those guys, um, and you're not trading Eflin. You're not trading Rodriguez. But I think Kramer could be on the move potentially. I think that Povich or one of our AAA guys that I mentioned could potentially be on the move. I don't think anyone wants to touch Trevor Rogers right now, um, which fair, but we can also be optimistic that the Orioles are getting him healthy the way they talked about. We'll see how it goes. But I am still cautiously optimistic that the Orioles are going to swing a trade to replace the number one pitcher in the rotation. People have talked about Dylan Cease ad nauseum. People have speculated about Pablo Lopez. I gave you an episode on all this. I don't have to rehash it. um, all right, yeah, let's turn to the lineup real quick before we get out of here. This thing is glorious. I cannot even say enough about this. What the Orioles have constructed here is spectacular. It really is. It's special. Not only do we have like a nice cast of young guys who are all playing at solid levels. It's like, no, Gunnar Henderson is one of the top 5 players in MLB right now. You have superstar power, and not just like power, like he hits the ball hard. I'm talking just like the power of having a superstar in the most nebulous sense. You have him, and he will be there all year. And you have Adley Rutschman, who, although he struggled, is one of the top 3 catchers in the major league, like in the major leagues. I'm laughing because I'm scrolling down the list and like I cannot talk about Ryan O'Hearn immediately after talking about Gunnar and Adley. I can talk about Colton Cowser, runner up to the Rookie of the Year. We all know he was the best rookie though, so he got cheated out of that. Um, Cowser will be back this year. Like that dude could easily hit 25 home runs again if he cuts down the strikeouts at all, learns how to hit some off speed pitches. He's going to be very, very effective. And he obviously plays the spectacular defense that we saw last year. You have Mullins again in center. You have, Jordan Westberg, who we were cheated out of seeing a first full season from him. Uh, Holiday, like we'll see how it goes. I'm cautiously optimistic that he's going to be significantly better this year. You have to be. He was the top prospect in baseball, but Holiday will be there. Um, and then, like Tyler O'Neill, we talked about him when he got brought in. I mean, the dude just mashes. And if we can keep him healthy at all, if we can, like really feed him left-handed pitching, it's going to be incredible. The guy has so much power. We're bringing that wall in a little bit. There is a chance that this guy goes off for 35 home runs this year. and just we never even think about Anthony Santander again. I love Tony, but like the combination of O'Neal and Heston Kjerstad could do much, much more than just replace Tony. It could surpass him in every way, shape, or form. So we still have the Ryans. Mountcastle and O'Hearn. This is still pretty painful from a roster construction standpoint. I think we'd love to have a lineup where we could have Kjerstad in there with Tyler O'Neill. Um, and I don't think that will ever happen because the DH spot is pretty much filled by one of the Ryans right now. We'll see. I think that again, if we are going to trade, this is a place to do it. We've talked about this before. Mountcastle has 2 years of control. He is a league average first baseman, plus defensively, and he's shown more pop in the past. He had 33 homer season, if I remember correctly. So there's a chance that Mountcastle goes ahead and thrives with another team. We slide Kobe Mayo in there, do something of that sort. We'll see how that shakes out. Um, I'm not necessarily expecting a trade of one of those guys at this point in the season. They'd make sense. Like I think a Mountcastle and Dean Kramer package is certainly enough for Luis Castillo. We could see how that shakes out, but um, I think like to call them the weakest spots on our team is kind of a disservice to them because you can see here O'Hearn is projected for a 119 WRC plus, Mountcastle projected for 116. They're both supposed to be significantly better than league average with the bat. It's just as first baseman you expect more from that position. I think average there was like 11% better, something of the sort. So only moderately better than the average first baseman. Um, and yeah, I mean, Holiday's got the second base job. We're going to give it to him. We'll see how that shakes out. I think that that it's hard not to be optimistic, but what we saw the Shohei Ohtani toe tap at the end of the year. And we know obviously that this dude is talented. People do not make mistakes on the order of everyone in the industry thinks that this is the top prospect in baseball and he's going to be phenomenal. And then he just busts. Not to say it hasn't happened, but as analytics, scouting, everything has gotten better in the last 5 years, that mistake does not happen nearly so much anymore. So, um, Holiday with another year under his belt in offseason to be training the things he was weakest with, you have to feel good about him coming in. We know he shows a good glove over there. So, I mean, yeah, Westberg, Henderson, Holiday going around the infield looks really, really good. And you can include Mountcastle in there if you'd like to. You look at our bench right now. Obviously, we got Gary Sanchez. This is another obstacle to Kjerstad ever getting DH time. Gary Sanchez, you know, when he connects with the ball, it goes as far as it does for anybody in Major League Baseball. Curious to see how Sanchez does. He strikes out a lot, of course. He's got middling defense, but I think you can count on him for more of everything than you counted on James McCann for. So, Adley, maybe we protect him a little bit more this year, take care of his body a bit more. And then we've got Urias who just, I mean, he just stays here all the time. And you keep thinking that you don't want him, and then he just produces. They're even projecting him to be 8% better than league average with the bat. This is actually kind of shocking. I did not notice this before. There's exactly one person out of all the position players on our team who's projected to be worse than league average with the bat, and only 2% worse. And that's Daz Cameron right now. Um, so, this offense was number 3 by WRC plus last year after the Dodgers and the Yankees. I fully expect us to take that number 2 spot after the Dodgers. Like when you're competing with Shohei, Mookie Betts, and Freddie Freeman, we might not quite catch up to them, but this is a powerhouse offense, and if the Dodgers were not doing historic things, you would recognize that we are. This is an incredible team. Daz Cameron is currently slated in as a backup outfielder. Heston Kjerstad there as well. I I don't expect Daz to play all too much. Sometimes I'm trying to think of the scenario. O'Neal would be out there already, and so I guess I'll say I can back up a step. The way that I expect this to shake out is O'Neal will be splitting time between left field and DH. I think that Cowser against lefties will slide over for Cedric Mullins. Cedric Mullins will take the day off against lefties, and Heston Kjerstad will hang out in right field a lot. I think that's the way that it kind of shakes out. I would trust Kjerstad against a lefty more than I would trust Mullins. That's not um, to say my opinion can't change on that after a month of Heston Kjerstad against lefties. We'll see how it goes. But um, yeah, I think that the way that Daz Cameron gets in is we're against a lefty and Cowser needs a day off. And so you sit Cowser and Mullins, you give Daz Cameron center field, you give Tyler O'Neill left field, and you roll with Kjerstad and right, probably. Something like that. I do think there's a place for him, and it's nice to have some relative wheels off the bench because Gary Sanchez, Ramon Urias, and Heston Kjerstad are not wheels off the bench. Um, like they are so far from wheels off the bench. Um, yeah, we'll see how that shakes out. A couple names notably missing from this as it currently stands are Kobe Mayo is not here, not currently slated to be on the opening day roster. That's interesting to me. I don't fully see that working out. I think that Kobe Mayo will be here. Where he goes, however, is a bit more of an interesting question. Urias is going to be there. I think you would have to, yeah, I think you'd have to put him in place of Daz Cameron. Kjerstad obviously is not going anywhere and is, I think, going to be sharing bulk of time in right field, kind of in the DH mix. We'll see. But if Kobe Mayo is going to be on this team, I think it has to be at the expense of Daz Cameron, and you have to trust Tyler O'Neill to be in the outfield a lot more this year. He has struggled with injuries. It's difficult. It's difficult. I'm there's no perfect alignment, and this is really where Mountcastle and O'Hearn start to bog things down because if you had an extra first base slot or extra corner infield DH slot to slide them into, then Kobe Mayo could come up and go to town. He could be the weak side of platoon. You could have Ryan O'Hearn as a lefty destroying righties, and you could have Kobe Mayo as a righty destroying lefties. Um, that would be an easy way to work Mayo in. Also, would probably protect him a little bit if he was struggling. Obviously, Urias has played first base for us. That's something you can do against a lefty with O'Hearn uh, riding the pine against lefties, as we have seen him do. There are a lot of ways this thing can shake out. I do think it depends, as always, on whether the Orioles decide to make a trade, clear some of this logjam. I think that another season in AAA is a wasted season for Kobe Mayo, much like it is Cade Povich. Um, so we'll see how this goes. I am completely and totally optimistic about this lineup, though. There's absolutely no way to look at this and say we're not going to be a top five offense in Major League Baseball. As disappointing as it was last year, you know, we were so good through the first, 2, 3 months of the season that we still, despite being about league average, for the last 2 months of the year, we still were the third best offense in Major League Baseball. That cannot be understated how impressive that is to be league average for 2 months and still be the third best offense. This team has so much potential. This team, the lineup in particular, is so unbelievably good. You have to be really excited about next year. Um, So that is really all that I had for you today. I'm gonna stop this screen share real quick. Oh, I pulled up my Discord. Oh my God. Where is it? So you can see my wonderful face with Tyler's real quick. It's embarrassing. I'm just gonna leave it on there. I'm gonna cut it out for the podcast people, but you people on YouTube know this happened, and I'm embarrassed. Uh, so anyway, that's been the Warehouse Pod. As always, if you guys could follow us, subscribe to us on your preferred platform. We always appreciate the support. Leaving comments, ratings, likes, thumbs ups, hearts, whatever you want to leave. We appreciate all of them. Helps us grow. Definitely come reach out to us. We are always available. Uh, Honestly, these days it's primarily Blue Sky, at the Warehouse Pod. You can email us, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can chat with us in the Orioles on the Verge patron Discord. I'm over there all the time. I spend way too much time there. And I know some of those guys are listening. So, hey, everybody. Um, and that's really all I got for you. Give us a shout. Let us know what you're thinking about how the Orioles are shaking up right now. I think, there's reason to be concerned with the starting rotation, just simply the lack of the super top of the rotation, somebody you'd want to go up against Zach Wheeler game one of the World Series, something like that. That's not something we have. Or I guess if we're facing the Dodgers, it's going to be Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, one of these guys. We have nothing to put up against that. And that's not a knock on these guys. Not many people can go up against that. But the way I said this to someone else is, if we're a top 10 rotation, when you get to the playoffs, 5 out of 7 teams have a top 10 rotation. Like a top 10 rotation is not good enough, quite frankly. So I am firmly, firmly holding judgment on this offseason until the offseason is done. I should not be sending you away from this saying, my God, Elias blew it. It's all over. No, that's not the case. There is time to do things. The Corbin Burns trade was in February. I may remind you, we all thought he blew it last year. No, it was in February. We got time. Things can still happen. Give that time, and then absolutely, by all means, make an opinion. And even then, Bradish is going to be coming back after the break. If you want to hold out for that, Elias, you're gutsier than me. That's fine. I respect it. Um, but you would love to see a top of the line arm who can come and, hold down 180 innings for us like Burns did last year. So that's all I got for you guys. Again, if you could support the show in any way, shape, or form, we always appreciate it. If you can't, keep on listening. We have a good time talking to you. And yeah, I suppose I'll talk to you next time. It's been the Warehouse Podcast. My name's Elijah. Go O's.